So excited about this webinar. See some folks are trickling in, and this is being recorded. So if you don't catch everything or you weren't able to make it, it'll be up on our YouTube channel shortly. And yeah, I'm just gonna get this started because we see people trickling in and it's already 5:30. So my name is Maya, and I am the CNPS program horticulture program coordinator. And I have Colleen and Rose here, and I'm so excited to talk to to you two about just Curious Flora and everything else. So I'm gonna do some intros. So first off is Rose, and Rose is a passionate and dedicated gardener with a deep connection to the natural world. Originally from Florida, she graduated with 2 Bachelor's of Science degrees, traveled coast to coast, and transplanted to California, which is where her roots have grown wide and deep. Rose spends her time nurturing plants and beautifying the world one wildflower at a time. And when she's not gardening at work, her free time is spent gardening, with a little reading sprinkled in there. Thanks, Rose, for taking the time. And Colleen was born and raised in California. After graduating from Cal Poly Pomona with a degree in horticulture, she spent several years working at California Botanic Garden. And while a love of growing plants may have taken her to far-flung destinations, it was her love of California flora that brought her home. Always a curious gardener, Colleen continues to develop her love and knowledge of natives both in the garden and the hiking trails throughout the Golden State. She's the co-owner and the chief growing officer of Curious Flora Nursery. And I'm gonna intro about Curious Flora a little bit too. Um, so Curious Flora Nursery is a wonderland where plants, people, and community continue to thrive in the footprint of the former location of Annie's Annuals and Perennials in Richmond, California. When a beloved nursery suddenly closed, a group of managers with decades of experience banded together to form Curious Flora. Curious Flora is an employee-led nursery committed to the continued curation and propagation of an astounding selection of plants from California's wildly diverse landscapes and gems from boundless destinations. And with more than 20 years together, Carlos and Memo will keep working their magic and piloting plant propagation. The new owner, Colleen, who's with us right now, will carry on her work heading up the R&D, introducing brilliant new curiosities to the nursery. They're thrilled to continue working alongside team members who, after years of collaboration, are as much friends as coworkers. Penny Orland, co-owner and Colleen's mom, is a welcome addition to the crew, making this one big family operation, literally and figuratively. So whether you're creating a new native garden or perfecting a classic cottage collection, come on by and help continue the legacy of the space where the rich and rare flora, knowledgeable and generous staff, inspiring gardens, wild parties, thoughtful classes, and unfettered delight continue. Yay, so excited to introduce you both. And like I said, this is being recorded, and feel free to use the chat function to introduce yourself and see where you're from. It looks like a lot of people are doing that already. And use the Q&A, and I am going to be monitoring the Q&A, but other than that, take it away, Colleen and Rose.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
My beginnings in horticulture started with California native plants, and so I'm so excited to bring the nursery together with CNPS to do a wonderful program like this. I know it's wonderful for us to have the opportunity to do outreach and also support home gardeners who are learning how to support California natives in their own garden. I'm so excited to have Rose here with us. Rose manages our gardens at the nursery, which are such a huge part of what we do. And it's a huge part of how we support learning and growing, not only in the Bay Area, but for everybody who comes from far and wide to visit the nursery. So just delighted to be here.
Very happy. Thank you.
And we thought what we would do today is talk to you about our 2 gardens that we manage. So I've got my personal garden. We've got our gardens here
in Richmond, California. So that is in zones 10A for me.
I'm in zone 9A. I'm a hard 9A. There are some years where it's bordering 8B. So we've got super different growing conditions because I can hang out during the winter in the low 20s for quite a while through the course of a night. So hard freezes up here.
Here it can get 30 to 35 as like our minimum low temperature, but really it's like 2 frosts out of the year, maybe.
Yeah, like a light dusting is pretty adorable
Yeah,
when it
yeah.
happens. And then we throw down frost cloth like it's the biggest most dramatic event of the year.
Yes.
So it is fun to see how different things grow and how that'll impact the timing of our flora, how it has different growth seasons between the two,
Yes.
and different flowering seasons.
Mhm.
And so right now, what's the big thing you're doing right now in the gardens?
So right now, currently, I am putting in a lot of California native annuals. It may seem a little bit late to some people, but you have to remember that for my purposes, this is a display garden. And so if you put in our California native annuals right now, we do like things to bloom at the same time, which may sound like a crazy thing, but we do plant things out at different times in order to get a mass spring bloom together. And so right now is a really good time to put in some annuals like Nemophila, Gilia, Leia, and have a nice spring bloom in no time.
Yeah, so we really try to hit peak bloom at like mid to late April and into May. Whereas I think for most of us, what we're really trying to do is spread that bloom out through as much of the season as possible and really extend that bloom and that wow factor that we can get in our garden with the blooms on our annual and perennial native plants. And so for me, I've actually been not only planting native plants in my own garden this month, but I started way back in late fall. I do the bulk of my planting usually in early winter. So I'm hitting my garden with the most fervor in about December, January. And that way I can spread out the bloom season. But I'm also fostering the little seedlings that come up in my garden from previous year's planting. So I've been very carefully plotting out my wildflower planting to make sure that I'm hitting all the corners of my garden space. So each year I've got a new crop of native annuals that come up, everything from lupines to nemophilas. And one thing that we always talk about is how we better foster those seedlings that come up in the garden. So right now I've got huge swaths of wildflowers coming up in my own garden. And the important thing that we all need to learn how to do
you
is
have to learn how to identify your little babies so that when you are weeding, you don't take out your reseeders that you actually would love to have there for you because it's free plants. And who doesn't love free plants?
Yeah. And I actually have a photo album on my phone that is just my baby seedlings so that I remember what they look like each year, because I can get a little sloppy. I might run out there without my glasses and I'm out there with a hoe and I'm not paying attention. And so I'd like to flip through my little photo album. Also, if I'm at a grocery store and people are showing me pictures of grandkids, then I have something to show them, my little plant babies. So that's one thing that we're both doing in the garden is fostering along those native annuals that come up on their own and then doing some native planting with the annuals. For us, a really big one this time of year is getting in the Clarkias. So you just did a big bed that is full of.
Now, it is called Let Them Eat Clarkias. We like to name our beds in very cute ways here. And so with our Clarkias, this is a great time to plant them because they don't mind the extra heat and drying out. Clarkias like to dry out. And so just keep that in mind when you are planting them.
Yeah, so that bed is largely, it's Clarkias,
Gilia, Nemophila, Colomia, grandiflora,
Phacelias.
Oh, I love Phacelia. Yes.
Yeah. So we really, because we've got a lot of our beds in place already, what we wanted to do was do a late season bed to help people see how they can extend that bloom season further into the year, further into spring, and really getting into summer, because I think a lot of people run on a notion that we have very few native plants that continue to bloom throughout the year beyond the salvias, which we love, and the epilobiums. So the California fuchsias, another great one for really like peak summer bloom, but finding those annuals that we can integrate for like that wow factor is really valuable. And for us, the Clarkias and the Facilias are ones that are going to take warmer temperatures and bloom longer into the year.
And then something else to consider about something that surprisingly has a long bloom time is actually our Schultzias, the California native poppies. And a lot of people think that they may just be a quick flash in the pants kind of spring bloom, but it is not the case.
No, and I like to remind people or let them know for the first time ever that they're perennials. They are short-lived perennials. The granddaddy that I've ever encountered hit about, I think, 4 years was the longest I ever had one in the garden. But my favorite thing is with a little bit of extra effort, and it is really minor effort, I can get about 9 months out of bloom from them. So that's almost the entire year. And I can do that with one simple trick. And it's something that I learned over time was the timing of it. But the trick is you have to let them look a little garbagey for about 2 weeks. It's not long.
But so it's something that I typically can't do here at the display garden because it is a display garden and people are looking for things to look nice year round all the time.
And it is a fantasy.
Correct. We are living the dream here at the gardens.
Yeah. But in my own personal garden, what I really aim to do is have to plant as little as possible, extend the bloom as much as possible. And so what I do is I let them get a little garbagey. And so they die back. They still have that wonderful, wonderful taproot, which is what allows them to sustain through the summer with very little supplemental water or none at all. And what I look for is I look for a push of nice new growth. So it's going to be that same gray-green foliage that we love, really feathery, really ferny. And I wait for that new growth to hit about 1.5 to 2 inches. And that's when I know that it's fully committed to putting on new growth, becoming a robust, fresh new plant again. And then I cut off all that old growth, throw it onto the compost pile. And the nice thing about that, because I've let it fully dry out, in all likelihood, I'm also going to get some fresh new reseeders in that area. So not only will I have this short-lived perennial that hopefully I can hold on to for a few years, and I'm going to get continual bloom, I'm going to be building up that seed bank of Escholtzias in my garden soil, which I absolutely love.
Exactly. So don't count them out. They bloom far longer than just spring.
Yeah. So in addition to planting, what are the big things that we're thinking about? We're thinking about keeping the weeds in check.
Oh, yes, for sure. So in my case, I do a lot of hand weeding at the garden because over time, collectively, we do have a few weeds that end up in there over time. It just happens. But for my purposes, it's not so much that I can't handle it with just some hand weeding, but for your garden.
Yeah. And also the hand weeding helps to maintain your native wildflower beds.
Oh, definitely.
In your spaces and maintain them where you want to keep them. For me, I started my garden about 3 or 4 years ago. It was nothing but a field of weeds. It's about 1/4 acre. It's waist high weeds as far as the eye could see. So year one was a shovel. It was a shovel and a weed whacker to keep the weeds in check before they actually set to seed. So really, I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't getting that seed bank any heavier, and then going in, digging out the big taprooted stuff and just like keeping it in check. And after about 1.5 years, I've gotten to a place where I can use a diamond hoe, which is my favorite of all the hoes. It's quick, it's easy, it doesn't break the back. If you're not familiar, it is a 4-sided implement where it's sharp on all 4 sides. It's got 4 very sharp corners. So it's really good at getting in and around your perennial plants. You can do some really fine-tuned work. I like to use it about 4 or 5 days after a really nice rain or after I've irrigated. So the soil is wet enough that I can slip the little implement about 2 inches under the soil, but not so heavy that it suddenly becomes exhausting to use. So timing the weeding, I find, is really important. And this is the time when you have to be most diligent, because this is the time where you turn your back for an instant and suddenly the weeds are 10 times what they were 2 days earlier.
Well, especially if you have any sort of winter rains. During the summer when things dry out, typically we don't have to worry about it too much in an area where you don't irrigate as much.
Yeah. And so we've talked about weeding, soil building.
Whew.
Soil building, that is something that we say soil, but with the gardens,
We call it fake soil just to explain to people that it's a beyond ideal situation. So here at the gardens, we do have raised beds. So probably about 4 feet down, there is real soil. It's going to be the clay at the bottom. But then on top of that, it's a bunch of organic matter, compost, and anything that I've used to amend the soil with since then. So that's why we call it fake soil, because it's perfect. It's ideal conditions that most people won't be dealing with. But in your case,
in my case,
you made a deal.
I did. We've all decided I must have made a deal with the devil because I have exceptionally well-drained, lovely silty soil. It's very easy to work with. I don't know. I mean, I definitely didn't do anything to deserve it. So the only explanation is devil.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that I haven't worked extensively with clay soil.
Yes.
Because I've worked so many other places, and every other place is probably pretty similar to what most of you are working with, which is going to be a clay soil that is compacted over time.
However, I do just want to point out a lot of people get upset about the clay and they think that it's like no nutrients. Clay is actually wonderful. It's nutrient packed. The main problem with clay is typically aeration. So it's not that it isn't good soil for you to use. You just need a little help with it.
Yeah. And so I really discourage people from saying poor soils or bad soils. It's just differently soiled. And what it is clay has very fine particle sizes. And what that can translate to is that water can frequently find it difficult to move through the soil profile when you have those really small pore spaces, and especially if those small pore spaces have been further compacted by the way that we build up our building sites or foot traffic or just time and mismanagement of soils. And so what I encourage people to do is to think about adding organic material. But with California natives, you have to be particularly mindful about how you add organic material.
Right.
Our gardens are a little bit different because the gardens here at the nursery, we're trying to get that whiz bang boom of like the biggest possible flower show. And so using fertilizers, not a problem.
Right. And still what I do here at the garden is more compost heavy, grapeseed compost, as well as other organic matter, worm castings. But when I do fertilize, it is with a water soluble fertilizer that does have more nitrogen, phosphorus, and the others. But as she said, that is because it is a display garden and I am trying to impress all of you.
And so what I do in my garden, where I'm not trying to impress anybody, no, what I do is I use a heavily wood-based compost product. So I'm making sure that there's no manure products, that there's nothing that's going to add a tremendous amount of nitrogen to my soils. Because most of our native plants come from regions where it's relatively spare as far as nutrients go. And to add a lot of extra nutrients in would increase the growth rates of the plants, which over time can actually decrease the longevity of your plants. And so for me, what I'm not trying to do is get out there and replace my ceanothus every 4 or 5 years because they've just outstripped their ability to support themselves. And so I really want to minimize the addition of nutrients into my soil. But for me, I want to add extra organic material because it actually helps that water retention in a well-drained soil. Strangely enough, it actually helps with water movement through heavily clay soils. And the way that works is as the organic material breaks down, it allows those very small particle-sized clay pieces to clump together into what's called colloids. And then your clay soil actually starts to behave more like a sandy soil. And so you go from having these very, very small pore spaces that are very difficult for water to move through with ease to these larger pore spaces, and you get water moving more quickly through the soil profile. So that's something I really encourage people to do if they are struggling.
So you do have to decide to fertilize or to not fertilize.
Yeah.
So it's something that you have to come to your own conclusion about, whether you want more of a big bang flower boom sort of situation, or really, especially if it's strictly California natives, you prolong their life if it's less fertilizer.
Yeah. And when applying organic material, be it in the form of compost or just wood chip on top of the soil profile, I do encourage people to take it pretty slowly.
Yes.
I do a lot of top dressing on mine. I leave it to the biota and the soil to move it through the soil profile, partly because I'm busy and I'm tired most of the time. So I'm not trying to get out there with a shovel and dig down 6 feet and mix it in myself. I trust that the little invisible critters in the soil will do that for me. I also want to make sure that as if I do incorporate it into my garden, that I'm not doing it in a way that I will have pockets of compost built up in any one section. I know the lasagna method is big with some people, and for some people they have wonderful success with it. For me, what I don't want to have is big pockets of compost where that can break down and suddenly I've got a cavity. I figure if it's not good for my teeth, it's probably not good for my soil or my plants either. Because in a large cavity, you can end up with big air pockets, or you can end up with big water pockets. And that could lead to either a plant drying out or to a plant rotting in its place.
Exactly. And some, in particular, California natives respond very poorly to a mass amount of compost, water, or fertilizer, such as Clarkias and things like that. They'll look good and you'll think it's doing amazing because it now suddenly is like 3 times the size. But then from one day to the next, it can just collapse because it's just too much for it.
Oh, like my lupin. So lupins are some of my favorites. Lupin Rodeo Rose, absolute favorite. It was part of what inspired this nursery continuing
And
on.
why is that?
Because I don't know how to germinate it, and Maria does. And I couldn't imagine having this garden, my own personal garden, without Rodeo Rose in it. So I was like, I guess I have to start a nursery.
And if you haven't had Rodeo Rose before, clearly you need to try it out.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's a bicolor annual where it's like a soft powdery pink and this like lovely saturated, like very like wine-esque, like deep maroon. It's just, it's lovely. It adds depth. It's long blooming. It's a beautifully sized plant. And then there's my other favorite lupin, which is the Lupin sericatus. And this was the complete, like, I purposely managed it in 2 very different ways. In one of my beds, I went dry after July. So like July 3rd, I think I stopped watering, and I didn't water until the rains came. So I didn't water at all. And then I had another that was in a bed with my roses and my non-native plants, just for giggles, see what they would do. And for about 4 months, they both looked great. Radically different. One was quite large. It was flouncy. You can guess which one that was. The other one was this beautiful, compact, really tight, perfect little dome of about 12 to 18 inches. And they were both great in their own special way. And what did eventually happen, though, was once the rains came, that little extra boost of natural water, and the lupin getting water just collapsed under its own weight. It just fell to pieces.
And that is the risk that you run if you decide to compost, fertilize, and water your native plants, because a lot of them are used to absolutely no summer water. So when we change that just because we want them to flower, they don't always respond well to that.
Yes. But there is there's always that like little caveat, which
Mhm.
is it really depends on where you're growing.
Totally.
Because I'm from Southern California. I grew in the Inland Empire, which is not an easy place to grow a lot of these plants because a lot of the plants that we love the most from California come from northern regions where it's cooler,
Right.
where there's a longer rainy season, or they come from the islands where it's also got that ocean influence and it's cooler.
Mhm.
So one of the things that you have to do when you're trying to grow some of those plants further inland where it's hotter and drier is one, you have to be a little creative, and you've got to play around with your summer watering.
Right.
Timing is really, really important with that.
With planting, for most of our timing, we do like to plant in the fall. There are warmer temperatures. Your root system is still going to be growing before the cold comes, and the top part is also soaking in the sun while they have it. But if you can't always plant in the perfect ideal time, there are other methods that we've learned, such as
Okay, so we've been calling it nurse plants, which I think is the correct term.
if it's not, it is now.
And so in my garden, it happened completely by accident. It was something that I had observed somebody else doing. And this was in Southern California, and they had wild success with it.
Mhm.
And what they were doing was they were planting Helianthus annuus, so our California native sunflower, which is a beautiful branching sunflower,
Stunning, huge.
long blooming, and will persist well into like the early, even up north, it'll go into like early winter.
I was gonna say almost Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's fantastic. And what they were doing is they were utilizing that around their newly planted perennials. And what it would do is it would create this wonderful shade, this light dappled shade, because it wasn't too dense. And they've got this root system that would go well below their perennial plants. So they weren't interfering with their water uptake.
Mhm.
They created that shade to reduce the stress while they got established. And I didn't use the Helianthus annuus. I was trialing like 60 different zinnias. A plant that's native to Mexico, a plant that is far more drought tolerant than people expect it to be.
Shockingly drought tolerant, actually.
Yeah. So I put in 60 zinnias all around my newly planted perennials, and I cut off water in June
Mhm.
July. And I had temperatures above 100 degrees multiple days in a row.
Yeah.
Not as hot as it is down south, but
Mhm.
gets pretty warm.
Pretty decent.
People in the Bay Area think it's shockingly warm in Santa Rosa. I'm here to tell you it's not.
If it gets over 80 in the Bay Area, people start to melt.
But you also were able to put it to practice here.
I loved it. So I did actually use the Helianthus annuus, and then what I did around it was mimulus, because it wasn't the prime planting time. So the way that we do it at the display gardens, I have to take out almost everything that we plant for spring and then for summer. So I'm planting in the heat of summer, which is not ideal conditions. But when I did this with the Helianthus and then the mimulus all around it, it provided that shade, that shelter, so that they got established. And then once the sunflower was actually done blooming, they're still the best looking mimulus that we have in our garden right now. That's how well they set them off for the future. Whereas other ones that I planted, I actually kept having a problem of having to replant them because they were just crapping out. It was not the right conditions for them. But that is to say that this is a very good method that we found that I was thoroughly impressed by, that I will be using in the future.
Yeah, hot, wet soils, not ideal for the vast majority of our California native plants. So anything you can do to create some dappled shade.
Natural.
Yeah.
Natural.
Yeah. And also it's the easiest thing in the world. They grow really easily from seed. We also sell them in the nursery.
They're also stunning, huge, large branching. The birds love them. Love them.
Super good for supporting wildlife. So
yes,
we absolutely adore them.
Reseeds a ton. So
yeah.
Winner all around.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the other things to reduce stress, both human and plant, in the garden, I would say would be mulching.
Yes. So here It's not exactly your regular mulch. I'm essentially using other plants to do the same thing, because the way that I plant here is multi-layered, and it pretty much covers from end to end. One plant is going to be touching the next. And so it does the same thing that mulch is going to do, where it covers that soil, where it's not drying out and you're losing water from empty blank soil. And it just really retains the moisture, and then also shuts out the weeds because there's just already plants everywhere.
And I love that. And it's aspirational for me.
Yes.
If I could keep myself from pulling out plants because I'm trialing new plants, then I would like to arrive at that place, because plants as mulch is actually my preferred method, because I love mulch. It's a wonderful tool in the garden. It's one that I use endlessly, but your mulch, depending on your irrigation system, can absorb a lot of your water.
Right.
So at planting time, it's really important to put a little trough around your plant. So I do a solid 6 inches of mulch every year. I get in a truckload, they dump it in the driveway. Takes 2 days to do 8 cubic yards. That's all I do for 2 days, because my fence won't close otherwise. And then people can,
so that hurries you along.
Yeah. So I'm out there, I'm dropping stuff, and I get about 6 to 8 inches of mulch coverage out of that. And what's really important, because I have micro spray emitters, I have to clear out space, and it's double function. I clear out space so the water can hit the soil, but I also want to make sure that my seeds do. So as my native,
you want your reseeders.
Yeah, as my native annuals go to seed, I want to make sure that they have good seed to soil contact. So mulch is fantastic. It's a wonderful tool. It's got multi-purpose. One, I'm adding, it's the lazy man's compost. So as it breaks down, it works its way into the soil. Yay. It's keeping your soil from scalding, which is really, really important during the summer. I had soil for my first year in this garden that was completely barren, and the scalding that happened, it broke my heart. It felt like it took about 2 years to recover just from 1 year of exposed soil. And then the other thing is weed suppression. It's really good at suppressing weeds. And I have a lot of people who ask me, what do I do about oxalis? I don't want to spray. I have a life. I don't want to spend every second of every day digging up oxalis, because you got to get those little nodules.
You got to get all the way.
It's a nightmare. But here's what I found: where I put down really thick layers of mulch, the oxalis goes to find the sun, and then it starts running along the top of the mulch. Do
nice.
you know the
Just
sweet feeling? I'm just like taking a freaking napkin off the table. It's just like, I'm done with you, you garbage. And always put it in the garbage. Don't put it in your compost.
Yeah, unless you want more.
Yeah, there are some weeds that I put or in the compost, depending on when I get them out. If they've gone to seed, they go in garbage. And there's some that are naughty enough that they just go straight to the trash can. If they've got those nodules, trash can.
Right.
Got seeds, trash can. And then there's a couple that I just feel hateful toward. Trash can. Yeah. But I feel like plants as mulch, that's the goal in my life.
Yes.
Because I get better air circulation that way. And also I'm going to get better water permeation. More of that water is going to make its way into the soil profile. Goals.
And so, speaking a little bit about compost, I know I already went into it a little bit, but here at the garden, I mainly use a lot of organic material compost. Grapeseed compost is a favorite. It is everything that they don't use in the winemaking. So like the skin, the seeds. And what that is it's more of a lower nutrient base across the board, so that I don't encounter the burning that typically happens. However, if you do get it on the lower leaves, it will burn. That's just what happens with compost. But typically that lower nutrient amount is good enough for me. And if I do need a boost, it is that spot fertilizing that I do. So when people ask the secret is really employing a 40-hour-a-week gardener, and then you too can have a garden that looks like a display garden.
Yeah.
But in a normal non-display garden situation, your compost, or I'm sorry,
Yeah. I use a largely wood-based compost because I'm mostly doing mulching. I do some actual compost, but it is wood-based at its core. And again, no manure products added. One, the concern over weed seed in there. Two,
right.
it accidentally coming in hotter than I want. And then three, I just want to keep that nitrogen down as low as possible when adding stuff into my garden.
And it does need to be said that, once again, it's the display garden, and also we do have non-native plants that we are concerned with their flowering and such for. So
yeah,
considerations need to be made for native versus non-native plants for sure.
Oh, I do want to rewind a second because we skipped, I think, a really important thing that I always want to share with the people who come into the nursery. And it is how we pick plants at planting time. So going back to the planting a little bit.
Yes. So picking your plants at a nursery. So we sell in 4-inch containers. And so for me, for what I am looking for at the garden, when I look at the top of it, the green part, I want it growing evenly in every direction. And also I like a chubby, squat, fat guy that's like really together, because typically it means that it's going to grow proportionally and stay nice and even and look wonderful for you guys to see. But also I want a good root system, but not too root bound. So when you do lift it up and there's the little holes on the bottom, typically you can see the root amount and how white they are, how full they are. You can also do like a nice little squeeze and see whether it's root bound or not. You will know the difference as to whether it squeezes or it does not. So very distinctive.
Yeah. So same thing. I'm always thinking about what's the relationship between the plant material up top and the root system below. And I want to know that what's up top is not out of proportion with what's below. And that's regardless of whether it's in a 4-inch, a 1 gallon, a 5 gallon. It's always the same rule. I tend to lean toward the mama bears on the table. So typically avoid the smallest of the smalls. But it depends, because sometimes the smallest one is exactly the right one. But I almost always avoid the big boys. I'd rather let something grow out for a couple days at my own house than plant something that maybe should have gone home a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
So I like, again, like you, I like the chubby little nuggets that are like perky, and that balanced growth is really, really important. What I'm not going to care about is if it's in bloom, unless it's blooming out of season, and then that says go away, like something's gone awry.
If it is the only singular one blooming on a whole table of them, don't pick that one that's blooming. It's normally a stress sort of factor, and so that may possibly be its emergency last push. So you don't want to get a plant like
Make
that.
those babies. So I don't concern myself too much if it's in bloom. In fact, I usually want something before it blooms, because I want it to be focused on developing a nice root system. So the earlier I get it in prior to bloom, the better. Sometimes I'll even pinch a bloom off here and there.
Sometimes. She does it all the time.
I do. And then I trail them all over the garden. I don't clean up after myself. Again, lazy man's compost.
Right. Yeah.
Over time, it'll work its way in.
Way over time.
Yeah. Her time, not my time. So picking the right plant is an important step to like having a robust garden that is minimal effort. And I think that's one of the things that we both have to consider. I don't have as much free time as I would like. I've been known to garden in the rain, garden with a headlamp on, garden with a headlamp on in the rain. And even though it's a full-time job for you, it's still too much for one person.
Definitely.
To have like luxury time to waste. And so starting with the right plant material, starting with the right base components put into place, because I'm a huge proponent of garden as long as it feels good.
Right.
Love your gardens. For me, starting with a 1/4 acre that was nothing but weeds, the first thing I did was isolate one corner to tackle, get it as close to perfection as I thought I could. And I'm talking a literal corner where I could just face my chair and look and pretend like nothing else around me existed.
You have to make it manageable.
Yeah, make it manageable. Find tools and cheats to help you get to where you want to be. Don't stress out too much about it. Let it continue to feel good.
Right. And make it to where you have reseeders, to where things are working for you in the garden so that you're not working so much.
Yeah, because it's easy to get frustrated.
Or overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, the overwhelm is a real thing. But I think that's one of the things that's allowed to do this for so long, is that we continue to find joy in it. You continue to pick up new tricks.
Exactly.
And hopefully we've shared some tricks that we've learned over the years with you guys. And if anybody has any questions for us, we'd love to answer. It's very quiet.
Yes, there's a lot of questions. Yeah. Thanks so much for taking the time. It was a really good, well-rounded discussion. Can you all hear me okay? I don't think my camera's on, but
Yes. Yes.
okay. Okay, let's see. All right. Do you collect seeds from your demonstration beds?
We definitely do.
Okay.
So we have certain areas spread throughout. Certain plants are designated as a seed plant that I intentionally leave in and let it go to seed for that purpose. So that is the one rare time. We actually even have signs to explain, forgive my ugly appearance. I am being collected for seed, so that people know. We also have designated areas where we have mom plants where we only collect seed in pots from them, but we do have ones in the garden as well as outside in our plots that we collect seed from.
Gotcha.
And one important note about collecting seed, and I'm not the person who knows the most about this, but I do know that there are a number of California native plants that are very prone to crossing with each other. So if it is very important to you that your species stay a straight species, isolating them either in time or in space can be a really valuable tool. So like for our Eriogonums, they're slutty. They'll cross really easily. And so a lot of times we'll have to designate a single year to do one. And then another year we do another, and we'll collect a couple years worth of seeds and then store those so that they hold over.
Gotcha. And a lot of people are asking about your preferred mulch besides plant mulch.
Oh, like your grade of.
Oh, I do one that is like green waste products combined with wood chip. So it's like very fine wood and compost, like a standard compost.
And once again, you do want it fine because you do want the reseeders to be able to come in between there. You don't want to cut it out completely to anything falling down.
Yeah. And also it looks better. There's that too.
Great, thank you. Let's see. Are you gonna reinstate the native plants area in Curious Flora? Since someone just asked.
Oh, we did not do away with it. We moved it.
It's just in a new area. Still totally there.
Yeah, so we moved, I think, 70,000 plants in about 10 days.
Yeah.
We have not moved all of the overhead signage because we just weren't sure that
that's the location that they were staying in.
Yeah.
And it's a lot harder to move the signs than the plants. So the signs are slowly coming along, but we definitely still have a very large California native section.
Yeah, and so it's moved. The other thing is it used to be sequestered over in an area that visually was blocked from the rest of the nursery, and we wanted to move it into the main floor of the nursery. One, we wanted more space for it to expand, because it is the area that we are trialing the most plants that we intend to increase the size of the most, and so we just needed a bigger footprint for it. And we also just wanted it on the main floor because messaging, I think, is very important, and for us to sequester it off to the side just felt like we were saying something to the public that wasn't in line with how we view California native plants.
We want the main floor.
Yeah, central focus.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Can you touch upon pruning a bit? Pruning shrubs, or any tips about pruning? That's kind of a big
Sure.
topic, but
So pruning in particular, you do have to be careful with your timing of it. So you need to know the weather around the time that you plan to prune, because a lot of plants like ceanothus, they are actually really disease prone, so that when you do cut them, they are likely to get a disease if it's, let's say, pouring down rain the next day or something like that, or it splashes on the soil and then that fungal matter gets in there, or any such thing. So you want to make sure that it's going to be dry for the next few days around it. Before and after pruning typically is preferred. And then also you want to keep your shears, your instruments very sharp, because it's very important that you get a clean cut, a clean straight cut when you cut it, because that also helps to prevent disease and rot. And it's still a good idea to have a slight angle. It doesn't need to be a crazy angle. You don't need to scientifically get it at 45 degrees, but a nice angle, just so that when you think about it, if there's something overhead that is dripping water or what have you, you want it to be able to slide off of there and not basically sit in there and rot that stem and the rest of it. So that's why the angle is good, but really clean shears. So clean them also in between your cutting with whatever nice recommended cleaning product.
Yeah, sanitization of your cutting instruments is really, really important. Timing, as Rose mentioned, is really important. And getting to know your plants and when they start to push new growth and when they're going to be in bloom is the first step that you take. So there's a lot of online information that you can find on this, but knowing that our ceanothus or manzanitas, they're either already set to bloom or they're about to bloom, depending on where in the state you are. So typically with your ceanothus and your arctostaphylos, you're going to want to wait until after the bloom season. They'll start pushing new growth after the bloom season. With something like your epilobium, so your California fuchsias, your baccharis, those are two that are typically a winter prune. And the way that I learned best how to prune my natives was to watch them closely and see when they were putting on new growth. So I use what I could find on the website or on the internet and what I could find in books as my guideline. But because we're such a long state and because it can be radically different from top to bottom of the state, I knew that it was really important for me to pay attention when I was seeing new growth. And so for the epilobiums, I want to wait until they push a really nice flush of growth at the base. It doesn't have to be 4 or 5 inches. I'm looking for about 2 inches to see that, like, that's where their intentions are, that they are pushing, and then I can cut out all of that old growth. For me, where I'm at, it usually hits about February. When I was in Southern California, it was typically December or January, which is radically different.
Yeah, you do have to know your area, but also closely watch your plant and literally look for the new growth beforehand. So it can change time-wise depending on where you are.
And there are some that you can cut back before you see that new growth.
It's just a safer method if you're uncomfortable with cutting them back or you don't know how to yet. That's a safer method.
Yeah, it's an experience thing, it's a trust thing.
Yeah.
I still wait. Like, I've been doing this for years. I know I can cut back a coyote brush even before I see new growth on it. I still wait to see new growth on it. With something like a salvia, that I'm gonna wait until it's quite a bit warmer. And again, I wait until I see new growth pushing. And whereas with an epilobium or a baccharis, you can cut back pretty much entirely to the ground. With something like a salvia, you're gonna want to prune it back a little more, be a little more reserved in your pruning back. So typically, I don't want to cut back more than a third of a plant in a year.
Right.
I have been able to reverse the ill effects of salvia be left to its own devices for about 5 or 6 years, where it was just this scraggly, rangy mess and thatchy, just endlessly thatchy. But over the course of about a year and a half, I was able to push it to where it had new growth at the base. And that was just by cutting it back by a third, cutting it back by a third, cutting it back by a third.
But so it is a patience thing.
It is.
If you get a little too crazy and you cut it back too hard, it can collapse.
And just poop her out.
Yeah.
It's just done. It's just like, it looks like you don't want me here. I'm out. And it's sad when that happens. So I typically encourage people to be a little more conservative with their pruning, get a feel for it, and then you could get a little more brave and rambunctious as time goes on, and as experience teaches you that hard cuts are acceptable to certain plants.
Right. But that is a good mention about the cold. So I was talking about the weather around it, but that also pertains to the cold. So you don't want to cut back something very hard before you're planning on getting a frost or a freeze. So just keep the weather in mind when you are pruning.
Yeah. Weather and seasonality,
yes,
has a huge impact on pruning choices.
Yeah, thank you for that. I feel like weather and just where you are, what you're planting, just makes a huge impact on the decisions and the timing of everything you do with gardening. So
for sure.
yeah. Let's see. What do you have any opinion about biochar? Interesting. A lot of people ask that in the chat.
Ooh.
Oh no, it is on my to-do list of things to like dig into, but as of yet, I don't think either of us have any experience.
Yeah.
Ooh, can you book somebody to tell us about biochar?
Yeah, that would be cool. Yeah, I guess it seems like that's a topic that people want to know about. Cool. What about, let's see. Just looking at these questions. How about oxalis, anything? I guess you all kind of talked about that already. I'm just like trying to think about questions that are more broad. What about Bermuda grass? Any
Oh no.
when it comes to weeding?
Your favorite.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same thing where you can use mulch to both smother and to get it to rise up above. I've certainly sprayed. It is effective. I know a lot of people don't want to. So for individuals who don't want to, I think the two most common methods are to do sheet mulching. I have found that it can stay pretty persistent under there. So really that's kind of approaching a lifetime choice of you just
You'll have to continuously add to those layers in order to keep it down there.
Yeah. And then solarizing can be moderately effective. I don't think it's going to fully eradicate it. And again, that's something that typically you have to do over time. We used to employ solarization at the Botanic Garden. It was highly effective for a lot of weeds, but it was something that we did once a year. And for a lot of people, once you start planting, it ceases to be an option. The way we manage that particular space allowed us to do it yearly. And so with that, the big takeaways that I learned was like, you got to get it watered before you lay down the plastic. Clear plastic is going to be better than black plastic. Typically you want to take off the plastic, rewater, relay it, and also get some extra oxygen in there. But yeah, I've done all three of those things.
I also suggest making a deal with the devil if you haven't tried it before. Could work
Sometimes-
out for
yeah,
you.
sometimes you get what you want. If what you want is like no Bermuda grass and
Perfect soil.
Yeah, perfect soil. Perfect soil.
Not to brag.
Yeah. Yeah.
No big deal.
Get lucky. Yeah. Thanks for that. I know it seems like it's a pretty persistent grass. It's hard to get rid of. Yeah.
For sure.
Let's see, what else? What about still a lot of mulch questions. I don't know. I feel like people are still curious about, is there anything more you can add like about
Yeah, I guess.
also I want to like highlight, keeping some areas of your garden mulch free for ground nesting bees and pollinators as well.
Absolutely. I've got a big chunk of my garden space that I love it because it's the area that I'm like, nope, it belongs to the salamanders. It belongs to the bees that are ground nesting. And it's my excuse to just be like, whatevs. Like I just throw like wood remains back there for the salamanders. I don't touch the soil. It is a really important thing to note because a lot of our bees, and we have, what is it, 1,600?
I think like 2000.
We got a lot of native bees, and a large number of them are solitary bees, and a lot of them are ground nesting. So really important thing to remember if you're trying to support wildlife and the pollinators.
But also, we were talking earlier about the mulching around your plant and to not do it too close for the rotting out factor.
Yeah, so like don't tuck things in too close. I see a lot of people when they lay down mulch, it's going like right up to the plant. I actually leave usually at least a 6-inch diameter. No, radius.
Yeah, all the
A
way
6-inch
around the
radius. Ooh, man.
plant.
Around the whole thing. But still that's not gonna be there for the bees. So like they still get a back section of the garden.
Right.
Which also gives me some reprieve from work. And oh man, salamanders. That is my jam.
They're so cool.
If anybody's up in the I can get really specific with product. If anybody's up in the Sonoma area, I get mine from Grab and Grow. They have an excellent product. I use 2 different products from them. One is their wood finds, which is a really inexpensive option, and I find them to be well sized. But yeah, check out most counties are going to have somebody who's producing soil products and mulch products, and I would recommend just taking a visit. Not everybody has the luxury of space for a large dump of material, but if you do, I would say make use of it.
It's way more cost effective.
Super cost effective. Get the kiddos out there, or do like I do and like reward yourself with lots of ice cream and just bang it out in 2 days. Cake.
Yay. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. All good reward systems to have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we only have like 1 minute left. Is there anything else you want to share about Curious Flora? And people were asking about if you're still going to have catalogs or anything like.
Oh boy. Okay, so I'll try and cram in as much about the nursery as possible. So like I mentioned, we're really, really excited about our California native offerings. It's really been the foundation of my background in horticulture. So I can't imagine us doing this nursery without further expanding what we do with California natives. We've been offering a lot of classes on that, and we'll keep building out resources for that. As for the nursery, we're not doing a catalog. It's just it's a big project, and it is a very expensive project to take on. So while we'll miss it terribly, it is something we're going to move past. We also aren't doing mail order. But what we're really excited about is we have started up our wholesale branch of the nursery. And so we hope everybody will keep an eye out for Curious Flora Nursery plants at their local nurseries. We love the nursery industry. We think one of the best ways to learn about plants is and become brave and explore new things is to learn. And so much of what I've learned has been in a nursery setting, from the people that I've worked with, the customers who come in, just sharing about plants and talking about plants has really allowed me to explore new things that were always intimidating until somebody like gave me a little nudge in the right direction and shared some tips with me. And so I really encourage people to visit their local nurseries. There's a lot of amazing nurseries in Southern California, Central California, and Northern California. And we really look forward to supporting them and all of the work they do by offering California native plants throughout California. Right now, we're local in the Bay Area, but we hope by spring of 2026 to be down in Southern California and up to the top of Northern California, because as growers, I feel like our job is to really support the retail stores that are throughout the state and allow them to do what they do best by doing what we love doing. So I think every day we just feel lucky to keep growing the plants that we love in the community that we love. It's just, I don't know that I've ever been so happy to go to work.
This is my job. I get to garden every day.
Yeah, it really is a wonderful group of people that have, I think, really carved out a place for California natives in the nursery community. And I feel really lucky to be a part of that next chapter. And we really look forward to having people out and sharing what we do with everybody.
Yes, please come check us out.
Yay. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time, and I sure learned a lot, and so did everybody else, and apologies for the train. But yeah, thanks so much for taking the time, and this is being recorded, so you're all gonna get the, YouTube recording in the next few days, and yeah, thanks again, and hope you all have a good evening.
Thank you. You
Thank
too.
you. Bye.